The water fell not as a sheet but as 1,000 braided ropes of liquid muscle, churning white where they struck the dark, slick stones of the plunge pool below. It was a constant, living sound, a roar that was so unceasing it became a form of silence. Behind this curtain, where the granite face of the mountain had been scoured into a deep crescent, was a space untouched by the cascade. It was a cavern, more a deep overhang than a true cave, its floor a mix of damp earth and shattered rock. The air was cool and smelled of wet stone, of moss, of the clean, raw scent of the high country. This was the place he had found. This was the place he was unmaking and remaking himself. His name was Finn, and he was 21 years old, though the grief he carried was ancient. He was a huge man, built with the dense, broad-shouldered frame of someone meant for felling trees or hauling stone, his hands calloused and wide. A thick, untrimmed beard, the color of dark river-bottom soil, covered the lower half of his face, and his hair, long and tangled, fell past his shoulders. There was a stillness in his blue eyes that did not belong in a young man, a quiet that had been bought at a terrible price. He had been a husband for 13 months. He had been a widower for 4. The fever had taken Lena in 3 days, a sudden, merciless fire that had left nothing behind but a hollowed-out shell of a man who no longer recognized the world, or his place in it. The town, with its well-meaning pity and whispered condolences, had become a cage. Every familiar face was a reminder. Every shared memory was a ghost. So he had walked away, carrying little more than an axe, a knife, and the weight of a silence that was louder than any waterfall. He had walked until the world of men was a rumor behind him and the mountains were the only truth. He had not been searching for the shelter. He had been searching for an end to the path, a place where his feet could finally stop moving because there was simply nowhere left to go. For weeks, he had moved through the jagged spine of the range, his grief a cold stone in his gut. He ate when he remembered to, slept when exhaustion finally claimed him. He was following a game trail that clung to the side of a steep canyon when he first heard the water, a low thunder that grew with every step. The trail ended abruptly at a sheer cliff, but the sound was immense, pulling him forward. He pushed through a thicket of stunted, wind-tormented pines and saw it, the immense, unceasing vale of the falls. He stood there for an hour, watching the water pour from the sky, feeling the spray on his face. It was a force of nature so absolute, so indifferent to his small human sorrow, that it felt like a form of peace. He had been about to turn back when a flicker of movement caught his eye, a mountain goat, impossibly nimble, picking its way along a narrow ledge that seemed to disappear directly into the cascade. Driven by a hollow curiosity that was the only feeling left in him, he followed. The ledge was treacherous, slick with a perpetual mist, but it led him to the precipice, to the very edge of the roaring curtain. He hesitated, then pushed through. The shock of the cold was instant, a brutal baptism. But then he was through it, standing in the strange, resonant quiet of the space behind the water. It was a raw, empty place, but it was hidden. It was a place where the world could not see him. It was enough. The journey inward had ended, and the journey to stay had begun, not out of hope, but out of a profound and bottomless exhaustion. He had found a place to put down his grief, if only for a little while. His first decisions were not born of a plan but of instinct, the simple, animal logic of a body that insists on living even when the mind has surrendered. The immediate problem was the dampness. The air was thick with it, a fine, chilling mist that coated every surface and seeped into his bones. The floor was a slurry of mud and loose scree. He couldn't sleep there. He couldn't rest. His first labor was to find the driest part of the cavern, a section deeper in, where the granite wall was less porous and the floor was slightly more elevated. Using his hands and a flat piece of shale, he scraped away the wet earth, digging down until he hit solid rock. It was mindless, repetitive work, and in its mindlessness, he found a sliver of relief. For hours, all that existed was the scrape of stone on stone, the ache in his shoulders, the burn in his thighs. He was not a widower. He was not a man consumed by loss. He was a creature clearing a den. The second problem was fire. He needed warmth, not just for his body, but for his spirit. A fire in the open cavern, however, would fill the space with blinding, choking smoke. He spent a full day studying the ceiling, tracing the intricate network of cracks and fissures in the ancient rock. He found what he was looking for near the back wall, a narrow chimney, a natural flue that twisted its way up into the mountain. It was too small to be obvious, but when he held a lit piece of dry moss beneath it, the thin ribbon of smoke was pulled straight up and away. He built his fire pit there, lining a shallow depression with stones gathered from the cavern floor. The first fire he managed to start was a small, sputtering thing, but the light it cast pushed back the oppressive gloom, and the warmth it gave was the first true comfort he had felt in months. He sat before it, wrapped in a worn blanket, and watched the flames dance, the sound of the waterfall a distant companion to the crackle of burning wood. He had a dry place to lie down. He had a fire that could breathe. It was a fragile foothold, a tiny island of order in a world of chaos, but it was his. The transformation from a damp hollow into a home was a slow, deliberate process, measured not in days, but in the rhythmic swing of an axe and the patient placement of one stone upon another. Finn's grief, once a paralytic force, was now fuel. He channeled it into labor, working until his muscles screamed and his mind was too exhausted for memory. The floor was his first great project. The bare rock he had cleared was cold and uneven. He decided to pave it. Each morning, he would slip out from behind the waterfall and make his way to the scree slope at the base of the cliff. There, he searched for flat, sturdy pieces of slate, stones that had been broken from the mountain face by ice and time. He would find a suitable one, sometimes as large as a small tabletop, and begin the arduous task of getting it back to his shelter. He would heave it onto his back, the sharp edges digging into his shoulders, and carry it, step by painstaking step, along the treacherous ledge. Some days, he could only manage one. On others, two. He laid them side by side, fitting them together like pieces of a vast, irregular puzzle. The work was brutal, but with each stone he set in place, he felt a sense of grounding, of permanence. He was not just covering the mud, he was building a foundation, something solid beneath his feet. Next, he addressed the constant, fine spray that crept in around the edges of the waterfall. He built a low wall of stacked stone just inside the entrance, a curving barrier about 3 feet high that acted as a breakwater, deflecting the worst of the mist and creating a calmer, drier space behind it. He used no mortar, only the weight and shape of the stones themselves, fitting them together with a patient precision. The wall became more than a practical necessity, it was a boundary, a line drawn between the raw, wild world outside and the small pocket of order he was creating within. He stretched a large elk hide over a frame of lashed poles to create a crude but effective door, a final layer of separation. He was no longer simply occupying a space. He was shaping it, imposing his will upon it. The cavern was becoming his own, every stone a testament to his endurance, every smoothed surface a silent monument to the sorrow he was slowly, painfully, working out of his body. Life settled into a rhythm, dictated by the sun and the seasons, not by the hands of a clock. The waterfall was his timekeeper, its sound subtly changing with the weather, a sharp, percussive roar after a heavy rain, a softer, more rhythmic hiss during dry spells. Finn's days were simple, but they were full. He rose before the first light touched the peaks above, his first task to rekindle the embers of the fire. The small flame was the heart of his home, a living presence in the stone shelter. After a breakfast of dried meat or whatever roots he had gathered, his work would begin. He maintained a line of snares in the woods beyond the canyon, checking them every 2 days. He never took more than he needed, a quiet respect for the wilderness that was now his warden and his provider. He spent hours gathering firewood, stacking it meticulously against the driest wall of the cavern, the neat cords a bulwark against the coming cold. He learned the land with an intimacy he had never known. He knew which berries were safe, which mushrooms would kill him. He knew the habits of the deer and the call of the hawk. He was becoming part of the mountain, his senses sharpened, his body hardened by the constant labor. The central motif of his existence was stone. He had built his floor and his wall from it. His fire pit was ringed with it. He ate from a flat stone plate and sharpened his knife on a smooth river stone. The stone was honest. It was heavy, unyielding, and permanent. It could not be taken by fever. It could not be broken by sorrow. It simply was. He found a strange comfort in its cold, solid reality. His grief had felt like a form of dissolution, as if he were turning into mist and air. The stone was its opposite. Holding a heavy rock in his hands, feeling its weight, its texture, was a way of reminding himself that he was still here, still solid, still part of the physical world. The silence of his life was profound. Days would pass without him uttering a single word. But it was not an empty silence. It was filled with the roar of the water, the crackle of the fire, the sound of his own breathing. It was a silence that was slowly healing him, allowing the noise in his head to finally begin to quiet. For nearly a year, he was a ghost in the mountains, a solitary presence known only to the animals. Then, someone else began to sense him. Her name was Moria, a Ute woman who had lived in these canyons since she was a girl, long before the first white surveyors had given them new names. She was old now, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her movement slow but deliberate. She knew this territory not as a wilderness to be conquered, but as a home to be understood. She knew every creek, every game trail, every hidden grove of berry bushes. And she knew when something was different. The first sign was a track, a boot print far larger than any she had ever seen in this part of the country, pressed deep into the mud near a spring. It was the print of a heavy man, a man who walked with purpose. A few weeks later, she found one of his snares. It was expertly made, the loop hung at just the right height for a rabbit, but it was the knot that caught her attention, a complex, efficient tie she didn't recognize. It was not the work of a passing hunter. It spoke of someone who lived here, someone who was careful. She began to look for other signs. She found a place where firewood had been cut. The cuts were clean, made with a sharp axe, and the leftover branches had been neatly stacked, not left scattered. This was not the work of a careless man. This was someone who respected the forest. She felt a deep curiosity, but it was tempered with a lifetime of caution. The men who came up from the valleys were often loud, destructive, and dangerous. But this man was different. He was quiet. He moved through the forest like a shadow, leaving almost no trace. He was a whisper, a rumor on the wind. She never saw him, but she felt his presence. It was in the unnatural stillness of the woods when she approached certain areas, the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. She would stand at the edge of a meadow, listening, and she could almost hear the silence he left in his wake. She began to think of him as the stone man for his heavy tread and his invisible, solid presence. She did not seek him out. That was not her way. She simply watched, and she waited. The first exchange was silent, a gesture left on a moss-covered boulder that stood at the intersection of two faint trails. Moria had been gathering yarrow when she came upon the stone and felt a certainty that this was a place he would pass. On the flattest part of the rock, she laid a small bundle of dried sage, tied with a strip of sinew. Beside it, she placed 3 perfect, late-season plums. It was a simple offering, a question asked without words. "Who are you? Are you a man of peace?" She left and did not look back. 2 days later, Finn found the offering. He stopped dead, his body tensing. For months, he had believed himself to be utterly alone. The discovery that someone knew he was here, that someone had been close enough to leave this, sent a jolt of alarm through him. He circled the rock, scanning the trees, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. He saw no one. He heard nothing but the rustle of leaves. Cautiously, he approached the boulder. He recognized the sage. He knew the plums came from a wild orchard a mile down the creek. This was not a threat. It was a greeting. He stood there for a long time, the small bundle in his hand, a strange and unfamiliar feeling rising in his chest. It was a warmth that had nothing to do with his fire. He did not know how to respond. The language of men felt foreign to him now. He returned to his shelter, the offering carefully stowed in his pouch. The next day, he went back to the stone. He had spent the night working a piece of deer antler, patiently scraping and polishing it into a sharp, sturdy awl, a tool for punching holes in leather. He placed it exactly where the sage had been. He added nothing else. It was his answer, spoken in the language he now understood, the language of useful things made by hand. When Moria returned and found the awl, she smiled. She picked it up, admiring its balance, its sharp, functional point. The stone man was a maker, not a taker. Their conversation had begun. Winter arrived not gently, but as a sudden, brutal assault. The temperature plummeted, and the great waterfall, the living heart of Finn's world, began to die. It happened slowly at first. The mist froze on the rocks, encasing them in a sheath of clear ice. Then the edges of the cascade itself began to stiffen, the braided ropes of water turning thick and sluggish. Over the course of a week, the roar subsided, replaced by an eerie series of cracks and groans as the ice expanded. Finally, silence. The waterfall was gone, transformed into a colossal, motionless sculpture of pale blue ice. A frozen cathedral now sealed the entrance to his home. A small opening remained at the base where the creek still flowed, a dark mouth in the wall of ice, but his world had shrunk. The cold was a physical presence, a predator that stalked the edges of his firelight. His neatly stacked woodpiles began to dwindle at an alarming rate. Hunting became nearly impossible as the animals sought shelter or moved to lower elevations. It was during this desperate time that his silent acquaintance became his teacher. He found her gifts on the stone more frequently now. A bundle of dried cattail roots, starchy and nutritious. A small pouch of pine needle tea to ward off sickness. Once, a string of smoked fish. In return, he left what he could, a well-cured rabbit pelt, a strong cord he'd braided from milkweed fibers. One day, he found a single, large snowshoe print next to the boulder, and beside it, a long staff had been thrust into the snow. At the top of the staff was a marking, 3 small notches. He understood. He followed the tracks. They led him to a grove of birch trees where she had stripped the bark from a fallen log, leaving behind a clear sign of where to dig through the snow for edible roots. She was teaching him how to survive the winter in these mountains, how to read the frozen landscape. He never saw her, but her wisdom was a lifeline. His connection to this one other person, a person he had never spoken to, made his isolation bearable. He was alone, but he was not abandoned. The frozen world outside was a stark, beautiful prison, but her quiet lessons were the key to its lock, showing him that even in the deepest cold, there was life to be found. The thaw came in late spring, a slow, dripping affair that turned the world to mud. The ice cathedral groaned, cracked, and finally collapsed in a thunderous roar, and the waterfall was reborn. With the return of the water came the return of the world. And the world, Finn was about to discover, had not forgotten him. One afternoon, as he was splitting firewood, a shadow fell over him. He looked up, his axe held ready. A man stood there, tall and lean, with a silver star pinned to his vest. He had the hard, weary eyes of a lawman who had spent too long on the trail. "I'm Marshal Thorne," the man said, his voice flat. "I'm tracking a man. Name of Jack Coulter. Robbed a stage, killed a guard. Folks in the valley said a giant of a man was living up here in the high country. Figured it was a place a man might run to." Finn said nothing. He just stood there, a formidable, silent figure, his size and wild appearance a challenge in itself. The marshal's eye scanned the camp, taking in the neat woodpiles, the stone-paved floor of the cavern visible beyond Finn's shoulder. "You seen anyone pass through?" Thorne asked. Finn gave a slight shake of his head. The marshal sighed, clearly not believing him. He had found Moria first, and the old woman had been maddeningly evasive, speaking in riddles about the mountain keeping its own counsel. Thorne was convinced the silent giant was either Coulter himself or was hiding him. He decided to push. "I'm going to have a look inside that cave of yours." He took a step forward. Finn didn't move, but his grip on the axe handle tightened. It was then that he remembered. A man had passed by his territory weeks ago, a furtive, haunted-looking man with a bad cough. He had given the man a piece of jerky and pointed him toward a lower pass, wanting nothing to do with him. He had forgotten the encounter almost immediately. But there was something else. A loose pile of rocks in the deepest, darkest corner of his shelter. He'd always assumed it was just natural rockfall. Now, a cold dread washed over him. He lowered the axe and stepped aside, gesturing for the marshal to enter. Thorn, wary, followed him into the dim light of the cavern. Finn went straight to the back wall and began pulling the loose stones away. Behind them was a small cavity, and inside it, a worn leather satchel. It was heavy. With the marshal watching, his hand on his pistol, Finn opened it. It wasn't filled with money. It was filled with letters. And on top of the pile was a small, silver-framed daguerreotype of his wife, Lena. The world stopped. The roar of the waterfall, the crackle of the fire, the marshal's breathing, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. The only thing that was real was the face in the photograph, the face he saw in his dreams every night, the face that was the source of all his pain. Lena. But she was not looking at the camera. She was looking at someone just out of frame, a small, secret smile on her lips. A smile he had never seen. His hands trembled as he picked up the first letter. Her handwriting was unmistakable. But the words were not for him. They were addressed to my dearest Jack Coulter. The fugitive. The killer. The man he had given food to. The letter spoke of plans, of a shared future, of a life away from the suffocating smallness of her marriage to a simple, quiet man who she claimed could never understand her soul. Letter after letter told the same story. A secret love, a desperate plan to escape. The money from the robbery was meant to be their passage to a new life. He had died for her, this man he had never met. And she had been planning to leave him long before the fever ever took her. The grief he had carried for over a year, the pure, clean sorrow that had driven him into the wilderness, shattered. It was not a clean wound anymore. It was a poisoned one, infected with betrayal and deceit. The entire foundation of his exile, the sacred memory of a perfect, stolen love, was a lie. He had built this stone shelter as a monument to a ghost, but the ghost was a stranger. He looked up from the letters, his eyes finding the marshal's. Thorn saw not a hardened accomplice, but a man whose world had just been utterly and completely obliterated. The raw, animal pain in Finn's face was more profound than any guilt. Silently, Finn gathered the letters and the photograph and held them out. Thorn took them. He read the first page of one, then another. His hard face softened with a look of grim understanding. He had been a lawman for 20 years. He knew the shape of human misery when he saw it. He had come up the mountain hunting a monster, but he had found only a man, twice widowed, once by sickness, and once by the truth. "I reckon my business here is done," Thorn said, his voice quiet. He tucked the satchel into his coat. "The man you're looking for. He never made it to the low country. The mountain keeps its own counsel." He turned and walked out of the cave, leaving Finn alone with the ruins of his memory, the roar of the waterfall suddenly sounding like mocking laughter. He spent the rest of the day in a daze, the letters' cruel words echoing in his mind. That night, he took the last of them, the one he hadn't given the marshal, and fed it to the fire. He watched his wife's words turn to black ash, and he felt not sorrow, but a strange, cold emptiness. A release. The fire consumed the lie, and in the morning, for the first time in a very long time, he woke up feeling not heavy, but light. He was no longer a man running from grief. He was a man who had survived the truth. He stepped out from behind the waterfall into the morning sun, and he did not look back. He was finally, truly, alone, and finally, truly, free. The man who lived behind the water was a legend now, a story told in the valley, but only Moria knew his real name was not grief, but endurance.